climate scientists believe the major driving force behind the enhanced climate change is from human activity, which has resulted into the increased temperature of the Earth. But before we get into that, what is the greenhouse effect? Well, basically think of the Earth as a greenhouse, made out of water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide. Approximately half the light that enters the Earth's atmosphere passes through the air, clouds or to the surface of the Earth, and is either absorbed or radiated in the form of infrared heat. 90% of this heat is absorbed by greenhouse gases and radiated back to the surface. Since you now know the basics of this, how do humans tie in with this? Well, after the last century, the use of fossil fuels like coal and oil have increased the concentration of atmospheric carbon dioxide. The industrial activities that our modern civilization depend on have raised atmospheric carbon dioxide levels from 280 parts per million to 379 parts per million in the last 150 years, as quoted by NASA. Climate change has already had a huge impact on us, as scientists have predicted a loss of sea ice, accelerated sea level rise, and longer and more intense heat waves, which probably explains why everyone's face is melting off. Scientists hypothesize an increase in global temperatures for decades to come, largely due to the enhanced greenhouse effect. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPC, forecasts a temperature rise of 16.39 to 22.33 degrees over the next century. Australia is one of the many global regions that are experiencing significant changes to climate as a result of the greenhouse effect. The air temperatures of Australia have increased by over 0.7 degrees over the past century, and emissions trajectories indicate that if left unchecked, the human greenhouse gas emissions will increase sevenfold over the 21st century. Australia's annual average temperatures by the year 2030 are predicted to increase by 0.4 to 2 degrees above 1990 temperatures, and it's expected that these temperatures will increase to 1 to 6 degrees by 2070. Australia's coastlines will experience an erosion and indentation as a result of the estimated 8 to 88 centimeters increase in global sea level. These are implications for Australia's environment, economy and public health. The biodiversity, ecosystems and natural habitats of Australia are potentially the most fragile in the world, and vulnerable when exposed to climate change. The only industry that will temporarily benefit from this is the Australian crop and agricultural and forestry, who will gain longer growing seasons as a result of the warmer climate, along with increased atmospheric CO2. Declines in precipitation over the majority of Australia will result in challenges to water availability and quality for agricultural, commercial and residential uses. These future changes in climate extremes will degrade Australia's infrastructure and public health, not to mention increased energy demands and maintenance costs for transportation, infrastructure and coastal flooding. Extra costs that are probably going to come out of our pockets. Great. So how has this changed our atmosphere? Well, we all know our atmosphere is mainly composed of nitrogen, oxygen and CO2, and scientists have hypothesized an early atmosphere of our Earth mainly composed of carbon dioxide with little to no oxygen. As the Earth cooled down, most of the water vapor condensed and formed the oceans. The portion of CO2 has decreased and is locked up in sedimentary rocks such as limestone and fossil fuels. It was also either photosynthesized by plants or dissolved into the ocean. In our atmosphere, the levels of CO2 are maintained through several processes, including photosynthesis, precipitation, and combustion. We are burning fossil fuels faster than it could be naturally removed from our atmosphere, increasing the amounts of CO2 and ultimately enhancing our greenhouse effect. We've built our society based on the burning of fossil fuels, all starting in the Industrial Revolution. In the current state of our society now, we are in no position to increase our population, our CO2 consumption, destroying topsoil and printing money to sustain our economy. We have to live without burning fossil fuels and adapt to the end of economic growth. We have to provide for 7 billion people while keeping within our limits. We have to live at the natural rates of replenishment. Alternative energy sources cannot replace fossil fuels in the time we have, and we've designed our infrastructures to cast through oil, coal, electricity, and gas. If we keep on following our current state of living, our future is bleak. Avoiding or at least reducing the unfavourable effects of climate change is a global challenge. Are we up for it? Well, we'll have to wait and see.